God give you joy, ye lovers of lore, that sitten in hall or dwell by the shore. Ye clerkes, ye children, ye parents wise, ye riddlers bold with peering eyes, ye gentle lordlings, proud and free, hark now to tale and fantasy.
The Great Tales is our humble song of miracles, myths, and legends long from Christen land and heathen field. We tell what time hath long concealed. Twice each month we shall you meet with storied words, both fair and sweet, the tales that folk in holy rede have kept in mind in word and deed.
Last time we went to Lithuania, where waves do lap with amber spray. 3 tales we told by candles' gleam, a myth, a lay, and a fair dream.
Now cometh forth with blaze and blunder a season I name hot Theban summer. Or if you like, with heatful dire, a summer crowned in doom and fire for Oedipus, that lord unblessed with clubbed foot and riddled quest.
Yea, certes, this day I shall unfold a tragic tale from Athens old. So dark it shames the starless night, where kings are cursed and robbed of sight. But Deacon Seraphim shall thee bring the elfish reed that mendeth things, for had he met the fairy kin, it would have gone more well for him.
This summer tide of 25 we speak at eve, but still are live. For worldly tides do wax and wane, and noonday's joy shall come again. If God grant and wind be still, we'll meet by noon, as is our will.
And that's got to be the most epic beginning of a podcast on Ancient Faith Radio ever.
That was really a lot of fun. I got a little carried away, and
Yep.
sometimes when I get carried away, I think you're like, ooh, I don't know. That's why I didn't even tell you I was going to do the pro wrestling thing for Father Stephen, because I was like, yeah, well, this is a forgiveness permission kind of a situation. But I texted you yesterday. I was like, I think I got a little carried away with the intro,
and I was like, oh, I'll look at it later. But yeah, I have to say that it was all I could do not to read this as, God give ye joy, ye lovers of lore, that sitten in hall or dwell by the shore, ye clerkes, ye children, ye parents wise, ye riddlers bold with pairing ayes. To read it in actual Middle English stuff.
So that was, I wrote it in a sort of faux Middle English because that was really where I wanted to go with this. But I think you made the right call to actually, read something people could understand. But
Right.
But yeah, anyway, I got a little carried away. The reason we did this, by the way, is that we're going to be talking about a Middle English lay, L-A-Y, or sometimes spelled L-A-I, in the Middle Ages. And so I spent a lot of this last week rereading this thing. And at some point, you just sort of get the rhythm and the rhyme scheme in your head. And so I just felt like doing a little something special for you guys.
Yeah. By the way, I just looked over at the chat, and Ava Beck says, "Please do this every episode."
Oh boy, that might be a tall order. But if you guys like this sort of thing, I will try to do occasionally. I like doing kind of spicing up the intro every once in a while. I think is super fun.
Yeah,
especially for a live show, just something for the people tuning in.
Right. So I have a very brief advertisement that I want to make for everyone. And the only reason I'm advertising it here is because I think the Venn diagram of people that like the great tales and people who love Orthodox Christian readings of J.R.R. Tolkien is probably pretty tight, I think. I strongly suspect. So, yes, Deacon Seraphim and I are both going to be speaking at Doxamut, and that is happening the weekend of Labor Day weekend.
It's not just you and me speaking, though. We also
it's not just you and me.
Have our esteemed colleague, Father Deacon Nicholas Kotar, and I don't think the three of us have ever been all in one place before.
I don't know. And then also Dr. Cyril Jenkins, of course, as well. So that'll be at St. Paul Orthodox Church in Emmaus, Pennsylvania. And tickets just went on sale. They just went on sale. So get them while they are hot. You can look up the event on Eventbrite. Just look up Doxamut, Doxamoot. And you can go there, and we'll drop the link in the chat so that people can check that out.
Yeah, I will say I have something very special that nobody has ever heard before, that I am very excited to debut. So please come. You will get a sneak peek on something that will probably not be published until 2027.
Oh,
so
exiting.
Yeah.
Yes. So begins our hot Theban summer.
Yeah. So, Father Andrew, why are you calling it hot Theban summer?
Well, why am I calling it that? So, first of all, of course, some of you were like, wait, why are they broadcasting right now? Because normally we are in the middle of the day.
I explained that in my, rhyming couplets.
In rhyming couplets, that's true. Yeah. But yeah, for the summer, we're going to be broadcasting at night, and we're going to be doing a whole lot of Oedipus this summer, which you might think to yourself, hold on, like, come on. Number one, isn't that a really dreary story?
Yeah.
Why would you want to spend a summer?
It's never good when they name a complex after you.
Right, exactly. And number two, how much is there to talk about, really? Well, it just so happens that Oedipus was one of those stories that not only was the classical world obsessed with it, but the medieval world was kind of obsessed with it as well. And there are multiple plays from the classical period that are extant. So we're going to do 4, maybe 5 episodes. I don't know. Maybe we find 6 episodes to do, the whole summer being all this great tale from Thebes.
I mean, I'm excited. I'm honestly really excited about it for 2 reasons. One is I love doing stuff on the classical world, which most of the time, if you and I get asked to go talk about things, we're talking Tolkien, we're talking, anyway. I love, like any medievalist, I love the classical world. Or any medieval person, rather, is what I mean. I love the classical world. But then also, I'm really hoping that we will be able to kind of go through the plays and then actually pivot to, I was telling you this earlier today, but the story of Seven Against Thebes, which is, of course, a play, but also it is the subject of the most important poem, which almost nobody has read. Anymore these days, which is called the Thebaid. It's called the Thebaid by Statius. It's a very important retelling in the ancient and from late antiquity. It's a very important retelling of the story of Seven Against Thebes, which is right up there. People don't realize this, but the story of Seven Against Thebes is right up there with the Trojan War, and in fact, the two things are related.
Yeah. So one of the good things about this series is that not only are we going to be tackling what is one of the most famous stories from classical mythology. I mean, the Oedipus story is extremely famous, and probably some of you out there maybe have not read it yet or don't know about it. You might know a little bit about it, but we're not only going to be tackling the actual story, but then also some of the other tales that are connected to it from the classical world. So sometimes people study the basic Oedipus story, then they don't read these other things. Right. But then we're also going to be looking at some medieval stuff that is a play on these plays, that is an extension of some of these stories. And particularly in this episode, here's how this is going to work. We're going to introduce you to the basic core Oedipus tale, okay? And I'm going to give that to you in just a minute here. But then the second part, and actually it'll be the lion's share of this episode, is going to be Deacon Seraphim telling you what is called the Lay of Sir Digory. Is it Digory or Digory?
It's actually, well, it's pronounced Digory in modern English. The name in Middle English and Old French would have been Digory, something like that. But we say it in modern English, we say Digory. So that's what I'll be doing tonight. That's what we'll be calling it.
Yeah, and I mean, I first ran across that name in the Chronicles of Narnia, just like every other
where most of us did.
Exactly.
Let's be honest.
People have this name?
You don't run into a lot of people with the name of Digory, which, by the way, is a huge shame. Digory is a super cool name.
I mean, you might still have some more children, so I have to...
Well, I mean, it's difficult because I have to name my kids after saints, and there is not a Saint Digory to my knowledge.
Oh, well, you could provide the world with one.
That's true. That's true.
So, yeah. All right. Well, let's get into it.
All right.
So, Oedipus.
What's his deal?
What is his deal? The thing that most people know about him, if they know anything about him at all, they'll say they know about the Oedipal complex, which was it Sigmund Freud that
Freud.
Came up with that? And that's about being in love with your mother on some level. So yes, there's going to be a lot of very
specifically it's the
uncomfortable
desire, it's the okay, so let me just say, by the way, my kids are watching. Hi, kids.
Hey, Roland,
we are going to talk about some kind of more dark things today. And we're going to do it in hopefully a way that's edifying. But just like, you know, fair warning, we're talking about the Oedipus story. So, you know, most of you were probably at least subjected to this, like in a humanities course you took at some point.
I hope
should
so.
have like some sense. Yeah, hopefully. I mean, this is one of those things everybody's supposed to read.
It's funny. I mean, I never read Oedipus when I was in high school. I didn't read Oedipus even when I was in college. And I actually have a minor in classics. But it was not part of the curriculum. I only really tackled Oedipus much later in life.
What did they make you read for a minor in classics if you did not read Oedipus?
You know, that was almost 30 years ago now, so I do not recall.
Yeah, that's
right off the top of my head. I'm just going to punt on that one.
Okay,
so we didn't read Oedipus. Yeah, so who is Oedipus? Well, number one, this story is about a legendary king of Thebes. Now, there's a lot of different cities named Thebes. So this is Thebes that is in, they would say Viotia is how it is in modern Greek. Probably would say Boeotia. Yeah, Boeotia. I know.
Gives me way too much like a sick joy to say it that way. But
Viotia. So he's a legendary king of that city. This is in the era of city-states. There is no Greece exactly. Greece is basically a region at the time. And if you know anything about the actual Oedipus story and not just Sigmund Freud's weird fantasies, what you know is that there's a prophecy that he would kill his father and he would marry his mother.
Yeah.
And
which are both really bad things. Spoilers,
yes, that happens.
Just to be clear.
That happens. And I feel like there's a, what's the term? It's a legal term. Statute of limitations on spoilers for stories that are, 2,500, 3,000 years old.
Well, probably even older than that, because I'll just as a put something out there. The stories that have to do with Thebes, like the stories that have to do with Troy. So the story of Seven Against Thebes happens in the generation after Oedipus. It's actually basically an effort to restore his son to the throne, or brother to the throne. Anyway, doesn't matter. This is one of the stories. This is actually a cycle of stories surrounding the collapse of the city of Bronze Age Thebes, which collapses right around the same time as Troy does, through a similar kind of. So this is one of the myths that comes to us out of the Bronze Age collapse.
Yeah.
This is, I mean, a very, very ancient story.
And it's about some of the most fundamental and dark taboos.
Right.
In just what it means to be human. This is stuff that even pagans go, no.
And also like, can you fight fate? That's the big question.
That's another big question. I mean, we're going to be asking some of these really, really hard questions all summer long and exploring them from a lot of different angles. I'm excited for this. It's a weird story, everybody, but I think this is one of these stories that's worth spending some time on. Sophocles wrote 3 plays on this. Aeschylus probably did 3, but I think only 1 is extant, Seven Against Thebes. And it just keeps, it gets getting remixed and retold and on and on and on. Humanity has been interested in this story for a long, long time. So he kills his father. He marries his mother. This taints the land. It messes things up. It's not just Oedipus has dark secrets. It brings all kinds of problems to the land. And I'll talk in a minute how that comes around. So number one, his name. So we're both philologists here. We're all philologists here. It's a safe place for philology. What does it mean? Oedipus. Well, it literally means swollen foot. Swollen foot. It's a weird name when you take it apart. But it's not one of those names that if you pull it apart etymologically that, don't do that, who cares what it actually means. It's actually part of the story. This is why he has this name, because the story is this way. He gets this name because he's found by a shepherd,
Right.
or given to a shepherd, depending on which version of the story you're reading. And his ankles are tied together. So they're swollen. We're gonna talk a little bit more about that in a second.
Yeah, tied together is the nice version of this, by the way.
Yeah.
In some version,
right.
they basically bored a hole through his Achilles tendons,
Yes.
and bound his feet together with a thong to basically hobble him, so that he would not be able to like find safety or shelter.
Crawl away. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the story, the best known version of the story is in Sophocles' play Oedipus the King, or as it's often called, Oedipus Rex.
Should be Oedipus Tyrannus, though. But anyway, I'm just saying.
Or
Wasn't really
or in the classic symphonic composition by Professor PDQ Bach, Oedipus Tex. Do you know about Oedipus Tex?
I don't.
You
I
don't?
don't know.
As a
I don't
Texan,
know.
you don't know about Oedipus Tex?
Nope.
So sidebar. So PDQ Bach is a composer invented by Professor Peter Schickele, who, as far as I know, used to be, or maybe still is. He might be past now, but he was at UNC Chapel Hill.
Okay.
And he did this sort of comedic classical music.
Oh.
And he had this one great piece called Oedipus Tex, which actually, when I was in high school, we played it when I was in band. So yeah, Oedipus Tex, actually. Look it up, everybody. So sound off in the chat if you guys know what I'm talking about, if you know about Oedipus Tex. So yeah, Sophocles' play Oedipus the King, or as it's sometimes called, Oedipus Rex, which is ridiculous because the play is in Greek. Why would you give it a?
It is often actually sometimes also called Oedipus Tyrannus in like, that's actually what like Roman sources call it.
Yes, yes, because they feel that way about kings.
Well, no, it's just because that's the Greek word for king.
Yeah. Also that. So yeah, but there are fragments of this story in a lot of different ancient sources. So there's bits in Homer, there's bits in Hesiod, and of course Aeschylus has probably 3 plays, but we only have one. Euripides, Pindar. A lot of people are talking about Oedipus in the ancient world. The continuation of the story that's in Oedipus the King from Sophocles gets told in 2 more plays. There's one called Oedipus at Colonna, and then also Antigone, or as they would say it in Greek, Antigone. And we're going to be reading all 3 of these plays in future episodes of the
and acting them out dramatically.
I'm ready to chew the scenery.
Nothing is stopping me.
Tight. Yes. It's funny when I think about overwrought acting of drama. In my head, I always see Robin Williams doing his in Dead Poets Society, doing this very stiff version of Shakespeare. He says, Titus, bring thy friend hither. Right before then he does a John Wayne version of Shakespeare.
Yeah, it's such a weird call to cast him as the villain in that movie. It's just always so puzzling to me. But anyway, continue.
But we're going to be doing all of these plays this summer. But I'm going to give you now, in case you've never read any of this, in case you do not know the Oedipus story at all, or maybe a little hazy.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you
a summary. Give us
a summary of Oedipus the King. This is the core story, right, as it's told by Sophocles.
All right.
So it goes like this. So there is a king of Thebes named Laius, Laius usually, or Laius. He's been childless, and so he goes to the oracle at Delphi to what's up? Why am I not having kids? And when he's there, he receives a prophecy from Apollo, because Apollo is the god who possesses the oracle at Delphi. And the prophecy, instead of telling him, this is why you're not having any kids, he says, if you have a son, he will kill you. If you have a son, he will kill you. You can imagine this kind of disturbed the man. And he goes back home, and sure enough, his wife gets pregnant. It's his son. and it's a boy. It's a baby boy. So you can imagine the way he feels when he sees that he has a boy, having heard this prophecy from the oracle at Delphi. And so he's got to get rid of the threat because, of course, this is not a Christian world. This is a pagan world. And, getting rid of one of your sons because he's a threat to you is something that absolutely they would do. So he has his ankles pierced, as you mentioned earlier, and tied together so that he cannot crawl away. And then his queen, Jocasta, the mother of this baby boy, she takes the baby, who has not been named, right? They're not even going to bother with that. And gives him to a servant and says to the servant, you need to go drop him off like out in the woods, out in the wilderness. And this is referred to as exposure.
Right.
And this is something that ancient people actually did a lot.
Yep.
I don't want this kid. Instead of like cutting his throat or whatever, they'll just drop him off in the wilderness and the wild beasts will
Yeah, I mean, in the Roman households, it was basically up to the head of the household to decide, is this a good baby or not?
Yeah, it was essentially a form of birth control.
Yeah.
Horrifying.
Birth control / eugenics, because the idea was like if the child was, like a girl and you've already had too many girls, or I mean, this is still practiced in many parts.
Ugly, deformed in some way.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So Jocasta gives him to the servant, and the servant goes out into the wilderness, and he can't quite bring himself to just drop the baby off. It's like, this is not okay. And he comes across this shepherd who is from Corinth, another major Greek city-state. And he gives the baby to the shepherd. And the shepherd sees what has been done to his feet. And he sees that they're very swollen, and so he calls him Oedipus, swollen foot, right? So the shepherd raises the boy for a while, but eventually he hands the boy over again to another couple. And this other couple are Polybus and Merope. And they're the king and queen of Corinth, and they've been childless. Mm-hmm. And so they have no kids. And so he's like, here, I have this baby, And so they adopt him, and they raise him as their son. And he's essentially the heir of Corinth. So he's a big deal. But, of course, he has zero idea who his real mom and dad are, right? He thinks that Polybus and Merope are his parents.
Right.
And one day there's a big feast going on, or
and
something
has
like
a very
that.
happy childhood as far.
Oh yeah, things are going very well for Oedipus. Very, very well. One day there's a drunk that shows up in the royal household, and he says, because as you know, as the saying goes, in vino veritas, right? I think we can just throw out Latin phrases while we're doing classical stuff on this podcast.
Yeah. I mean,
okay?
Sure, yes. Again, I just want to clarify, this was written in Greek, everyone. But anyway.
That's true. Yep. But so the drunk says, you're not their son. This is not really your parents, right? He actually calls him a bastard. But
yeah.
Which is not literally true from the way we understand that. And so Oedipus asks, his parents, the king and queen of Corinth, is this true? And they say, no, you're our son. But it bugs him. Like it starts to eat at him, What's eating Oedipus? So he decides to go to the oracle at Delphi himself to say, is this true? Am I not, are those not my parents? Right? And the oracle, instead of answering this question, tells him, and this is kind of the key thing, you're going to kill your father and marry your mother. And now he thinks that this means Polybus and Merope.
Right.
So he doesn't go back home.
Which he does not want to do, Sigmund.
Yeah, he doesn't want to kill his dad. Doesn't want to marry.
If you're listening, this is not. Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Right. This is not normal even for pagans. It's just not a thing. So he doesn't go back home because he figures, look, I need to get as far away from my mom and dad as possible. I don't want these things to happen. So he decides to go to the nearest city, the city that's near the oracle at Delphi, which is Thebes. Thebes in Boeotia.
Boeotian Thebes. Boeotian Thebes.
Yeah. So on the way to Thebes, he encounters Laius, his real dad. He doesn't know. Neither one of them know, right? And it's very famously at this place where three roads come together.
Right.
Three roads come together. This is a very important detail, okay? And so they don't recognize each other, of course, because, I mean, Laius hasn't seen Oedipus since he was a little baby, and Oedipus, hasn't seen his dad since he was a little baby. And they kind of both approach the intersection at the same time, like who has the right of way with their chariots, and they start to fight. And Oedipus kills Laius in this fight. So he does kill his father, but he doesn't know that that's what's happened. He just knows that this is this guy, at this
just a little road rage incident.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So then he continues on his way to Thebes, and on that road there is a sphinx. Now, this is not like the big sphinx that you see in Egypt, a gigantic stone sculpture. This is a living being. It's obviously a supernatural living being. It's a spirit of sorts. He encounters a sphinx, and this sphinx had been terrorizing the road to Thebes. Essentially, every traveler that came up, the sphinx would ask that traveler a riddle. And if they couldn't answer the riddle, the sphinx would kill him. So it's a very dangerous road. And so far, no one had been able to answer the riddle. And so, he encounters the sphinx, and it's depicted as a female. She asks him the riddle. Now, this is one of the most famous riddles in the history of humanity. This is a classic, literally.
She asks him, what do I have in my pockets?
What is your name?
Oh, wait.
What is your quest?
Sorry, this is the wrong.
This is the capital of Assyria.
What is the airspeed of an unladen swallow?
Right. Exactly. But I mean, right? Okay, we make these jokes, but that scene from Monty Python and the Holy Grail ultimately is derived from this.
Ultimately, probably almost every riddle scene. Actually, I mean, this is sort of a thing in The Hobbit. Hey guys, we're doing a Hobbit podcast now. But like he mentioned how ancient and sacred the riddle game is.
Yeah.
And that is a reference to things like this, right? That as old as human institutional memory goes, we have scenes like this.
Yeah. Yeah, this is like built into the human spirit on some level. The idea that you can't continue until you answer this riddle. And we're going to have all summer to talk about what that means, not just in this literal kind of mythic sense, but also like, what does that mean in terms of life? That you have to answer certain riddles to kind of move on with your life. Anyway, let's just tell the story. So she asks him the riddle, and here's how the riddle goes. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? And Oedipus thinks for a moment or two, and he guesses correctly. And he said, it's man. It's humanity. 4 legs in the morning, that's crawling on all 4s as a baby. 2 legs at noon, that's walking upright on 2 legs as an adult. 3 legs in the evening, that's when you're old and you have to use a cane. 3 legs. So the Sphinx now has been defeated at her game.
And she handles it really well.
She basically some versions I think some versions she jumps off a cliff. She kills herself. It's interesting, by the way. I mean, we're going to cover this next time because we're going to do Oedipus the King. We'll actually talk about the play, but the play, almost everything I'm telling you discover only in flashbacks and conversations. The play opens after all of this has already happened. Yeah,
the play is extremely sophisticated.
Oh, it's
in
brilliant.
Terms of how and this is why it's okay for us to spoil the story for you, because if you know the story, you have it in your mind, then it'll let us actually just focus on the play.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is
and the play presumes that the audience knows the story already.
Yeah,
it's a well-known story even at that point. So the Sphinx jumps off a cliff, and the way now is open, right? So he continues on to Thebes, and when he gets there, they hear what he's done, that he rid the road of the Sphinx. This is a big deal. I mean, these roads are the lifeblood of these cities for trade and for whatever else. And a lot of people have been getting killed by the Sphinx. And since the king, Laius, has been dead for at least some time now, Jocasta, now the widow queen, her brother Creon, who is, important member of the government, He had declared that any man who could rid the city of the Sphinx would be made king. And so when Oedipus arrives, they offer him the throne. And of course, if you're going to become the king of Thebes, that means you should have the queen of Thebes. And so he marries Jocasta, who he does not know is his mom. And of course, she doesn't know that this much younger man is her son. And they do indeed have children together.
Yep.
Right. Which, again, all of this plays out in weird ways in the following.
And this turns out these are the kinds of things: killing your father, marrying your mother, having children with her. These are the kinds of things for which, to paraphrase Leviticus, the land will spit you out.
Right. Right. Exactly. So Oedipus, unbeknownst to him, unbeknownst to himself, he has committed the twin sins of patricide, killing your father, and incest. And because of this, Apollo, who is not guiltless in all of this, but we'll need time to talk about that.
Apollo has, he just gives people answers to the questions they ask, like very little literal answers.
Sure.
Context is really up to you to infer.
That's true, I suppose. But Apollo, Apollo is depicted as an archer. Right?
He's the god. He's a plague god, among others.
He's a plague god, which this image exists in the ancient Near East, and in some ways, probably Apollo is a kind of Hellenistic version of these ancient Near Eastern.
In the Levant, he was equated to like Nergal or Beelzebub.
Yeah, and you've also got
being like a plague god,
Rephish, who's mentioned in the Psalms. But yeah, a god with a bow and arrow is a plague god in almost every context.
Yeah.
Because the idea is that disease is sort of shot at you. It just suddenly strikes you. So he rains down disease on the kingdom of Thebes because of this. And this is the point actually where the play begins. Is the place has been devastated by disease. Oedipus is the king. Everyone loves him. He has children with Jocasta, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then the way that the play goes is that essentially there's a series of messengers that arrive and various kinds of questioning and conversations back and forth.
It's
and Oedipus,
so brutal.
Oh, it's really like
heartbreaking.
The dramatic irony. This is the most dramatic irony, I think.
Yeah.
Ever.
Dramatic irony, because people, I think we don't know what irony is, and nobody knows what they're talking about when they say irony.
Alanis Morissette.
Yeah, for sure. Dramatic irony, which is a particular kind of irony, dramatic irony is when the audience knows something which the people in the play or the film do not.
Yeah, exactly. So it's, in this case, the way that the play works is that the audience knows the story. Again, it's a well-known story. And what they're watching is Oedipus finding out bits of it, and probably the tension of seeing this happen. Like say it, realize it. As an audience member, you're like, just get this over with. I can't take it anymore.
Come on, you idiot. Come on.
And so gradually, what happens is Oedipus learns the awful truth about who he is and what he's done, and just as, especially the final bit of it, which is you've married your mother, buddy, when that begins to be known and he's suspecting it, his mother goes somewhere else and kills herself. And Oedipus, in discovering what has happened and what he has done, he gouges out his own eyes. And that's where the play basically
ends. And that's where the first play ends, you guys. There are two more plays after that.
In Sophocles, yeah. So that's the basic Oedipus story. That's the core that connects us to all of this. It's not fun. It's not a nice story. It's awful. There's a certain kind of satisfaction you get from the end, not because you want to see his mom kill herself or you want to see him gouge out his eyes, although in classic Greek fashion, those things do not happen on stage.
Right.
You see, what happens is you see someone comes in and say, "Oh, Jocasta has hung herself," or you see Oedipus come in and he's already blind. The blood is on his face or whatever. They're not going to show you that stuff directly. That's not how ancient Greek drama almost ever works.
Yeah.
Usually that kind of horrifying stuff, you hear about it. You don't actually watch it happen. Very different from modern cinema, where they're like, something horrible, we'll put it right on the screen. You know, they don't do that. There's this dramatic tension that's kept up by doing that. So here's the question now that leads to the rest of our episode. Why would Christians keep telling that story, and what would they do with that?
Yeah. So what do you do with this? Okay, so I was actually going to go in a very different direction, which is some Christians read the story and they were like, what would make this better is if it had a happy ending, right?
Yeah, which wait,
as far as what the literary value of the play itself is, which I think that'll speak for itself next time, but we'll talk about that. It would also be good for us to give a little context for like Greek drama and theater and like what's going on there as well, because it's for instance, the Oedipus plays are probably in some way related to like a sort of founding myth for the sort of, let's say, contemporary city of Thebes when the play was written, or shortly after, or shortly before it was written.
And founding myths are what we would call religious.
Yes. Yeah, right? Absolutely.
These are about the spirits that began this place and that inhabit this place and are influencing this place. There were various contests, and I think, as I recall, maybe Sophocles, that this one was written for one of these dramatic contests. But the contests, of course, they're not just entertainment, although people are obviously being entertained, but there is a very strongly religious element to it as well.
Yeah.
It is, and this is, by the way, what underlies what some of the church fathers who are still living in the midst of pagan, with the leftover pagan elements, why they say things like "don't go to theaters," because it has these pagan worship elements involved. And often there's, of course, other elements of paganism. I shouldn't say other. There's certain elements of paganism that are present there, too. Like a theater is also a place where you can maybe hire a prostitute. And
very often actors and actresses were also...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen of the night, as you might say.
Yeah, as you might say. Okay, so...
Yeah.
Yeah, so the direction I actually wanted to go with this... is just a thin pretext for my rant, which I'm about to launch now, about what actually is a fairy tale.
Oh.
So this is something I've teased a little bit in previous episodes of the Great Tales, and I just got to get it all off my chest, guys. Okay, so...
All right. Let it go.
Preface this by saying I literally run a company where we publish fairy tale books, which do not meet the definition of fairy tale as I'm about to give it. So here I am, a hypocrite, the chief of sinners, etc. Whatever. Buy my books. My children need to eat. But
how dare
anyway,
you, sir.
Yeah. But okay. So a fairy tale, as the name implies, this phrase, by the way, comes from French. A fairy tale, as the name implies, is a tale in which fairies are somehow involved, in which they make an appearance, in which they are some kind of a part of the plot. Tolkien says in his famous On Fairy Stories essay, which I'm about to talk about a little bit, that fairy tales are not stories about fairies. They are stories about humans who get caught up with fairies. So, by this definition, and we have to assume Tolkien, Germanic philologist, literally wrote the book on several of these fairy tales that I'm about to talk about. I mean, literally wrote the book. We have to assume he knows what he's talking about. And I have to say, by his definition, the successor, one of the successors of the Brothers Grimm, the so-called Grimm's fairy tales, which are not called fairy tales in German, just don't qualify. There are no fairies in Grimm's, right? Fairies in particular have to do with the Celtic otherworld. And we're gonna do a big fairy episode at some point in the future, probably when Hot Theban Summer wraps up, and I'm gonna answer every fairy question that everybody's ever had.
Wow! So write them down, kids.
Write them down because it's gonna get weird, and I'm gonna go all the way down the rabbit hole, and I'm gonna answer all the things. I'm just gonna answer all the questions, but for our purposes right now, let's say that fairies are they're what is left over. When pantheons are shattered. That's what fairies are. And so in somewhere like Ireland, you actually have several different kinds of groups that all get lumped together as fairies. And if you take a look at these groups, it's like invasion after invasion after invasion after invasion leaves all these sort of shattered remnants of hierarchies, remnants of pantheons, remnants of patterns that collectively kind of make up this Celtic otherworld. In several places like Wales or Brittany, which we're about to talk about a little bit more, that is
Where's
the Celtic.
Brittany?
Yeah, it's the
Therapy?
Celtic coast of France.
Okay.
It's if you go, I mean, you can still find people there who are speaking a dialect of a Celtic language that sounds like a weird version of Welsh. Or Welsh sounds like a weird version of Brittonic, who knows? But anyway, it's a language closely related to Welsh for all intents and purposes. There's actually the best example of somebody singing in this dialect is there is a French, but she's a Breton, Breton, French Breton pop artist named Nolwenna Leroy. And if you go look for her stuff on YouTube, which I think is mostly PG level, like she's not that kind of pop artist, if you know what I mean. But anyway, she has she's got a music video where she's actually singing an entire song in Brittonic, so people can go find that.
People have bagpipes.
They do have bagpipes, but everyone has bagpipes. To be fair, if you look far enough, everyone has bagpipes.
Even Lithuanians have bagpipes.
Yes, Father Andrew.
It's true.
Yes. I mean, the ancient Egyptians had bagpipes. Listen, I don't believe there's ever been a single person who has not cut open a sheep and been like, you know what? That bladder, I could play that. I remember when I was a young man
playing bladder.
So one time I shot this goose, and my friends and I figured out that we could make a sort of an instrument out of the goose's larynx and voice box. And I mean, that was like several hours of fun. So,
the other option when you have a stomach of some kind of animal, is to take the offal,
right, and
grind it up with oatmeal or something like that.
Again, these are not mutually exclusive options.
And put it inside.
Do both things. Sheep have more than one stomach.
That's true.
So yeah. Okay. So So Brittany is the Celtic coast of France, and they have a kind of a very interesting kind of culture that's similar, and again, in a lot of ways to Welsh culture. They have their sort of own retellings of the Arthurian story. They're one of the reasons that the Arthurian story crosses and recrosses the English Channel multiple times.
Yeah.
So, in Brittany, there was a kind of story that arose called the Breton lay, sometimes spelled Lay. Older spelling is Lai. It's probably said more like lie, something like that. But it just means a telling. It just means a tale. Funnily enough, almost every culture's specific word for their most famous genre of literature just means a telling. The saga is the said thing. The epos, the epic, is the said thing. Yeah. The lay is the thing that you say. It's the thing that you tell, right? So it over time, this word, which probably is a borrowing from Old High German, but anyway, it's neither here nor there. Over time, this word eventually comes to mean a very specific kind of story. So the Breton people had a very robust fairy tradition, much like the Irish or the Scots or the Welsh. A very robust fairy tradition centered around usually, I don't want to overgeneralize here. There's something called a corrigan, which is usually a female fairy who wants to seduce a human man, and if she can't, to a certain degree. To a certain degree, yeah. And if she can't have what she wants, then she makes your life really, really, really miserable. Sometimes the stories end unhappily. Now, the Breton lays are not actually don't usually deal with this kind of fairy. or to say, rather to say that the Breton lays do very often deal with fairies and romantic couplings, either real or thwarted, between humans and fairies. But what's distinct about the Breton lays is that most of them have this very strange thing in medieval literature, very strange thing in the ancient world.
I'm on the edge of my seat here.
A thing we might call a happy ending.
What?
Yes.
What?
Yes.
What? I thought we were talking classical literature here. There's no happy
I know. There's no happy endings in classical
There's no
literature,
happy
right?
endings in ancient Greece.
And so the way that I would try to characterize this is to say that there's a little bit of a trick that the people who wrote the Breton lays, who are all Christians, by the way, the people who wrote the Breton lays, the thing that they would do is use a little bit of fairy magic, or use the intervention of a fairy as a proxy for grace. And so this is the way to kind of think about these stories. It's like, well, a little bit of, and what those things have in common is the way that they're unexpected, the way that they're kind of mercurial. Like, you don't always know how God is working, what God is going to, it's the same kind of a thing with fairies. So you don't know exactly what to expect from them. So probably the best Breton lay, and by the way, these are all relatively short poems. So these are not, you should not think of like, the Iliad or something like that. They're all about 1,000 lines or less. So Sir Digory, which I'm going to tell you tonight, is about 1,100 lines. You can read it in a sitting, that's not even like one book of the Iliad, right?
Yeah.
And they're in rhyming couplets. Most of them survive to us in Middle English. So there was a famous collection called the Lays of Marie de France, and then later on, a bunch of those were retold or translated into Middle English. And the Middle English is usually pretty easy. So with a little bit of help, you could read this for yourself. And one of the things that's interesting, they don't all do this, but there are several of the lays that are deliberate retellings of classical myths. So a few weeks ago, we told you guys the story of Orpheus and the underworld. And I really wanted to get into the Middle English lay, which is based on the... So remember I mentioned Breton lays kind of become a thing? So in England, you have people writing lays that are actually just written in Middle English, but they call them Breton lays.
Yeah,
and it is a way of...
style.
It's just a way. It's like it's a genre. It's at that point, by like the early 14th century, this has become like a genre of literature that if you write something, you say, hey guys, I wrote a new Breton lay, people will know what you mean, right? So
yeah.
So Sir Digory and Sir Orfeo, both actually written in England, originally in Middle English, not translations from French. Just in case anybody out there is trying to actually us on this. I don't know why this is a pretty obscure area, even for us.
I don't know.
But
someone in the chat has already said that we're what was it? It was said something about I don't know, lies. Yes, turn this live stream into a house of lies.
Yes, that's right.
So I don't even know what they're referencing.
That's
there,
right.
but
That's right. Right.
Actually,
I assume it's the fact that lay is could also like pronounce lie in Old High German, but in any case, so it's a house of lies. Yeah, you have Father Andrew's House of Enchantment. I would have Deacon Seraphim's House of Lays.
Lies.
Yeah, lies. Yeah. Okay, so
yeah,
all of this is by way of saying that these are. The Breton lays are a category of stories, and almost the only category of stories that I think fall fully under Tolkien's definition of what a fairy tale is. So I'm going to now, at this point, read a little bit on fairy stories. And I'm going to preface this by saying, if you're one of the people out there like me who has attended lots and lots of Tolkien conferences, I've even hosted a fair number of Tolkien conferences, approaching the double digits now, I believe. Spoken at them, presented papers at them, attended them, hosted them, etc. You will know that there are always so many on fairy stories essays submitted that typically speaking, you have to just give it its own track, because you don't want to turn away these poor people. And everybody's got an on fairy stories essay, but also we all know that they're all going to be the same thing because you've just discovered eucatastrophe and it's the best thing in the world.
It is.
You want to tell everybody about it. And yeah, sure, right? It is the best thing in the world. And I get it, man. I get it. And I'm not trying to run you down, but the problem is that people never actually really dig into what Tolkien is saying.
Oh, it's
and
a
part
long,
of it is,
complicated essay.
It's a long, complicated essay, and it's a very complicated kind of a thought, because obviously many of Tolkien's own stories do not feature eucatastrophe. You know, the sort of this idea of the happy ending, which I'll explain this in a moment. Many of his own stories don't feature this, and many stories which one would traditionally consider to be fairy tales don't feature this.
Yeah.
So what is he talking about? So he says, the consolation of fairy tales has another aspect than the imaginative satisfaction of ancient desires, which is one of the things he says fairy tales give us. The ability to like be one with nature, talk to animals, etc., right? Far more important is the consolation of the happy ending. Almost, I would venture to assert that all complete fairy stories must have it. Now, Tolkien's an Englishman, so you always have to ignore the first qualifier because he's just being understated. So he says, almost, I would venture to assert that all complete fairy stories must have it, and that must is a qualifying must. It's an understating must, right? So we can ignore the almost, but the I would venture, right? It's like he's got like three. He's saying kind of a big thing, and he knows he is, and so he's watering it down, as he often does with his strongest points.
Yeah.
Right? He said, almost I would venture to assert that all complete fairy stories must have it. At least I would say, here's another, that tragedy is the true form of drama, its highest function. Remember this, kids, for next week. Or next episode. Not next week. 2 weeks. Next episode. Tragedy is the true form of drama, its highest function. But the opposite is true of fairy story. Since we do not appear to possess a word which expresses this opposite, I will call it eucatastrophe, right? In other words, like like ev, the beginning, it's the beginning of the word Eucharist, it means the good, right? Yeah. So it's the good catastrophe. The eucatastrophic tale is the true form of fairy tale, its highest function. And then at this point, people read this and they're like, oh, look, happy endings. Lord of the Rings has a happy ending. Look, guys. Tolkien likes happy endings.
Huzzah.
He goes on to say the consolation of fairy stories, the joy of the happy ending, or more correctly, of good catastrophe, the sudden joyous turn. So it's not just a happy ending, it is a good catastrophe. It is when something is supposed to go wrong, but it ends up going very right instead. Okay, that's what a eucatastrophe is. The sudden joyous turn, for there is no true end to any fairy tale. This joy, which is one of the things which fairy stories can produce supremely well, is not essentially escapist, it's not fugitive. He defined those terms earlier in the essay. In its fairy tale or otherworld setting, so, by the way, he says, or otherworld. People, I've never heard anybody bring this up, by the way. The otherworld is where fairy stories take place.
Yeah.
The fairy stories, especially in the Celtic tradition, the Breton lays, are about humans who cross over into, who have to go into, or kind of touch in some way. They touch the Celtic otherworld.
Yeah.
And the which is polyvalent with the idea of the land of the dead. So Aran is the king of the dead in Welsh mythology, but he's also the king of the Celtic otherworld. Okay? So fairies are associated with death in a certain way, but they're not quite the devil. But they are associated with the other world and the realm of the dead. They're not the same thing, but they do overlap.
Yeah.
As I said, they're polyvalent. We'll talk more about that whenever we do Sir Orfeo one of these days, which has one of the, you're going to love it. It's one of the creepiest scenes in any poem I've ever read. You're just going to love it so much. So he says, in its fairy tale or otherworld setting, it is a sudden and miraculous grace, never to be counted on to recur. It does not deny the existence of discatastrophe, of sorrow and failure. The possibility of these is necessary to the joy of deliverance. It denies, in the face of much evidence, if you will, universal final defeat. And insofar is Evangelium, that is gospel, a giving a fleeting glimpse of joy beyond the walls of the world, poignant as grief. It is the mark of a good fairy story, or of the higher or more complete kind, that however wild its events, however fantastic or terrible the adventures. It can give to a child or a man that hears it, when the turn comes, a catch of the breath, a beat and a lifting of the heart, near to, or indeed accompanied by tears, as keen as that given by any form of literary art, and having a peculiar quality, with a capital Q. Okay, so my argument is that the Breton lays have this. And the way that they do this, because Tolkien has drawn a line between this and grace, between this and Evangelium, and he said that this is the quality of a fairy story. And I do not know of any other genre of actual fairy stories which Tolkien is known to have read, which qualifies. Now, he when he cites examples in the On Fairy Stories essay, he seems to be quoting from some of the stories in like the Andrew Lang fairy books, which
oh
of
yeah,
course,
sure.
And it's a lecture in honor of Andrew Lang is the context of the original delivering of this essay. So he does seem to quote one or two stories there, and he also quotes something from William Morris, who is like a modern writer of fairy tales or romances in the generation before Tolkien. But we know that Tolkien worked extensively with these. In fact, one of his main works as a philologist is a critical edition and then also a translation of the Sir Orfeo poem. Yeah. So this is a genre he was deeply familiar with, very, very, did a bunch of scholarly work with it, and it's the only one that actually seems to check all of the boxes when he goes deep into what a real fairy tale is. So what I want to kind of propose is that we should think about this storytelling tradition as tragedy is the highest form of drama.
Okay.
When you transform drama into eucatastrophe, when you transform tragedy into eucatastrophe, the way to do that, the medievals thought, was with a little bit of fairy magic. And so in the Sir Orfeo retelling, which is obviously, as the name implies, a retelling of Orpheus and Eurydice, there's a little bit of magic. There's a little bit of magic that makes that story have a happy ending. And in our story today, there's a little bit of magic that takes a story that could be really dark as Oedipus, or darker. There are actually some things in the story I'm about to tell you which are even darker and more sinister than the stuff in the Oedipal myth.
And I have to tell, and this will help to create a certain degree of dramatic irony, perhaps, for our episode. I have to tell everyone, I have never read this.
Yep. You don't know.
Nor have I heard anyone tell me this story yet. Yeah. So you are going to be getting me experiencing this for the very first time, probably as most of you, probably.
And we are going to do a little bit of break from what we've done in the last 14 episodes, which is I'm not going to be reading to you. I'm not going to be reading like from primary sources. I mean, I could just sit here and read the poem to you in Middle English, and that would be fun for me.
Would be fun. And
maybe like two other people, and you're one of them. But what I want to do actually instead is tell you the story. This is a telling, all right? And because this is a story, along with the other Breton lays, that I have been learning, a little help from our friend Dr. Shaw, to tell to my children. And so this is a story that has kind of hung around with me. It's been in my jaw, as Martin would say. And so I'm just going to tell you guys the story the way I would tell it to my children.
Okay. All right. I'm all ears.
Like all good stories, at least all good fairy stories, this one begins once upon a time. Once upon a time in those days when noble knights were many, when they had such adventures by night and by day, as the poet says, as it would be wonderful to tell, there was a land called Brittany. Now, this is not Britain, not the one that you know, the Britain of Arthur and Lord Byron and Winston Churchill and probably some other people that I'm forgetting. This is a land akin, a land across the English Channel on the Celtic coast of France. And this was in the old days when there were many little kingdoms all across Europe, but most of those kingdoms were called duchies and the rulers were called dukes. But the Duke of Brittany at this time was a famous and powerful man. In fact, he was so famous, he was so heroic, he was so powerful that he may as well have been a king. Now, the Duke of Brittany had many great treasures: horses, suits of armor, golden chalices, so on and so forth. But his greatest treasure of all was, of course, his daughter. She was, as you might guess, a beautiful young maiden, and when her maidenhood reached full flower, the Duke decided that, like all treasures, this one must be guarded. So he made a decree that none could marry his daughter unless they could defeat him in mortal combat. Seems pretty reasonable. After all, it would not do for the Duke of Brittany to give his daughter to a lesser man. So, people come from all the surrounding duchies and earldoms, kings, dukes, earls, princes, lords of distant Persia, even Saracen knights, smelling of all the perfumed incense of Araby, came to vie for her hand. Some say Tristan was there. Some say even Lancelot himself was there. They all came, and there were way too many for the Duke to fight all at once. And so naturally, they organized a tournament. And the idea was that the winner of the tournament would fight the Duke, and if he beats the Duke, wins the tournament, he gets the princess. Well, they fight and they fight. If this were, some other context, if this were Mallory, I would spend a couple of chapters right here just giving details for all of the jousts, the lances piercing through breastplates, and people being unhorsed, and people being, cut up to smithereens, but they're totally fine the next fight. Yes. So a beautiful young maiden comes in and staunches the wounds, etc., etc. But let's just, for brevity's sake, we'll just say they fight, and of course one of them wins, and he fights the Duke, and of course he loses.
Oh.
But they're all so eager to win the hand of the princess. And the Duke is no closer to having an heir, and so he decrees that another tournament will be held the next year, and everyone goes home.
Reasonable.
A year passes. The princess is beginning to feel a little cooped up, as young women sometimes will. The time for the next tournament comes around again. Everyone's there. The kings, the dukes, the earls, the princes, the lords of distant Persia, and even Saracen knights smelling with the perfumed incense of far-off Araby. They fight. One of them wins. He fights the Duke. He loses.
I didn't see that coming.
At this point, the princess is getting restless. The Duke is getting frustrated. And as for the suitors, well, if you think that this discouraged any of them, you couldn't be more wrong. Because after all, a prize that no one can win is all the more valuable. And so the fame of the princess, rumors of her great beauty and virtue, spread to far-off lands. Now, I should probably mention at this point, because it's important to the story, that the Duke had no wife. That is to say, his wife had died in childbirth, giving birth to the princess. This is important because one of the few respites that the princess had from the constant smell of sweat and oil and armor and horses and the endless tournaments and the hapless suitors were the trips that she and her father took together to a chapel out in the woods where there lived a pious hermit, a holy man. Each day, on the day of his wife's death, the Duke would ride out to this chapel, and there he would hear a mass in memorial for the soul of his beloved wife. Now, on one such day, the Duke and the princess rode out with a small band of retainers and with the princess's maids in waiting. And on that day, it was particularly warm. The princess was tired. She was lagging behind. So the Duke and his men ride on ahead. And she says to her maidens, "Let's stop. I want to rest a while." So they dismount, and the young woman set to chatting, playing, and finally they fall asleep under this ancient chestnut tree. All except for the princess. She gets up to pick some flowers. And as she's picking one flower after another, she sees another flower a little more beautiful. So she walks a little deeper into the woods to pick that one, and she hears the bird songs chirping. She hears the birds chirping, and she's picking flowers. And before long, she's got a nice bouquet. And then she straightens up, and she looks around, and she realizes she is lost.
Well, the prettiest flower is farthest from the path.
That is true. So you never know what's going to happen when you go wandering deep, deep into the forest. In those days, almost all of Europe was one vast forest, and there were these deep, dark places places where paths and trails crossed and crossed again before vanishing altogether, places that don't care anything for who you are, or who your father is, for crowns or kingdoms or maidenhood. Old places. And it began to grow dark. And the princess began to grow afraid. She said, "Alas," says the poet, "alas that I was ever born." Well, this is how princesses talked back in those days. She says, "I'm so lost, and now some wild beast is going to come and eat me, and all that there will be left of me will be my bones." So she begins to cry out for help. Maybe not the smartest thing to do if you're worried about wild animals, but in any case, this is what she does. And that is when she sees him. He was the loveliest knight the princess had ever seen. And as I've mentioned, she's really seen quite a selection up to this point. He was gentle, not gentle, but genteel. You know, gentle used to mean something different.
Gentilesse.
Didn't mean
in Middle English.
Didn't mean nice. It meant having the qualities of a nobleman. Yeah,
good,
young, handsome. He had a scarlet robe around his shoulders. He had long, dark, flowing hair.
Oh.
His mail glittered brighter than any armor that she'd ever seen. His face was fair. The bards tell us that his body was well-shaped in every way. Let the reader understand. And she'd never seen a man so handsome, so attractive as he. He had no horse, no spear, no shield, and only a bright sword hanging at his side. And he says to her, "Don't be afraid. Yes, it's true. I am one of the sons of the Corrigan. But I mean no harm to you. For many a year I've loved you from afar, and now that we find ourselves here, I'll make sure nothing bad happens to you. Only, you must take me as your lover before you go." Well, here the bards tell us that she wept, and that he took her, and that he begat a child by her. This is by far the darkest part of this story. And it just goes to show that you never know whom you may meet if you wander too deep into the woods.
You know, I kind of wonder, though, with that long hair that he has, is he a Frank? That was kind of a thing in the Frankish royal house, as you know.
Yeah. Well, in this case, no, I don't think so. But
no.
Yeah,
I'm just putting that out there.
Yeah. Well, his name wasn't Frank, as far as I know. At their parting, the fairy knight says to her, "I've given you a son. But to show that I don't mean to abandon you forever, I will give you 2 gifts, one for yourself and one for my heir." And so as gift, he gave her a pair of beautiful gloves, golden gloves, which had been made by the fair folk, which would fit no other hands but hers. I don't remember. Did I mention? Yeah, no, I did. I did say that he loved her from afar, right? Okay, yes. Okay, so
you can say it again.
Yeah.
Repetition is a good
Yeah. That's right.
Trope,
That's right. Yeah. So he gives her a pair of beautiful gloves made by the fair folk, golden gloves, fit no hands but hers. And he says, "And for my son, I will give my own sword." And he draws it forth, and she sees that the blade has been broken off about a quarter of the way from the tip.
The blade that was broken.
And he says to her, "This is the blade that was broken. For when I slew the king of the giants, the tip broke off in his skull. Take it now, and when my son is old enough to wear a sword, give it to him. Then, when our paths cross, as they will, I will know him by this blade, and he will know me." And then he was gone, swallowed up by the deep shadows of the forest. And the princess found herself back under the chestnut tree, her maidens awaking as though from a deep spell of sleep, and she wept for what had befallen her. And when they returned, the princess returned to her tower, more than happy to be locked away now from prying eyes. As the jousts and the feasts and the tournaments played out beneath her window, the child in her womb grew and grew. And at the end of the time appointed to women, she brought forth a man-child, dark of hair and gray of eyes, those same eyes that the fairy knight had had, those eyes that had looked a long way forward and forgotten to look back. She was glad of her son, but she knew she could not keep him here. The scandal that would come upon herself, upon her father, upon her whole household. In fact, the poet says she was a little afraid. People, since she was never around any other men, people would think something had happened with her father, and they would come after him. So, with the help of her old nurse, she sneaks out of the castle by a postern gate, rides out into the woods to the little hermitage that she had often visited as a girl. And she laid her son before the chapel altar and placed the fairy gloves beneath his head for a pillow, put a sack of gold at his feet, and tied a letter around his neck with a silken thread. This is what the letter said, as I have heard it sung. And now I will read something, because I don't have this part memorized. By charity, if any knight should find this child in sorry plight, let priests with holy water bless, and raise him up from wilderness, for he is born of noble line. So aid him, for God's sake and thine, with treasure hidden at his feet. And when his years are 10 complete, then give him these gloves of gold, and bid him, wheresoe'er he's bold, to love no maiden in the land unless these gloves fit on her hand. For none shall wear them true and fair, save only she who him did bear. So then the princess steals away into the night. The next day the hermit finds him there, reads the letter, and christens him with holy baptism. And since he doesn't know the name of the child, he names him Digory, which means the lost one. It's a non-name. It's a name of someone who doesn't know his name, who doesn't know his story. And he sent little Digory away to be raised for a few years by his sister, a merchant's wife. By all accounts, he had a very happy childhood until he was 10 years of age, after which he was brought back to the hermit. And there, deep in the woods, Digory drank water from cold streams. He ate roots and berries and the silver fish that leapt in the river. He learned the names of the stars and the songs of the birds, and the hermit even taught him, we are told, priestcraft. But he could see that the boy's hands were made to wield a sword. Now, there were no swords in the hermitage, but there was an axe, and Digory learned to hew wood until he was strong, stronger than any man in those lands, yet living, stronger than even he knew. But let us not forget that Digory had fairy blood in his veins. Well, when Digory was 18 years of age or thereabouts, he began to wonder after his mother and his father. And he questioned the hermit on this a number of times, and after asking 3 times, he finally got something of an answer. The hermit produced a letter, he produced the gloves, and he produced the gold, of which the hermit had spent but little, only what was needful for the boy's upbringing and education. And Digory read the letter, and he was silent for a long time. At last, he kneeled down, and he kissed the hermit's old, weather-worn hand, and he said, "I'm going to go to find my mother." And the hermit shook his head sadly, and he said, "I weep that I have no sword or armor or horse with which to arm you, for you are certainly the son of a nobleman." So Digory took his axe, and he cut down the largest sapling that he could find, and he fashioned it into a large stave or cudgel, too large and heavy for any man but himself to wield. And he says, "This shall be both horse and arms to me, until I have earned better." And so it was that Digory went out into the world to seek the woman who had given him life, and to learn who he was, his name, his purpose, his story. So Digory walked all that day and all the next. Never a man nor beast did he see, until at last he came to a valley where he heard the sounds of battle. Now this valley, you should know, was once fair and pleasant, but it had been wasted by the depredations of a grim dragon, we are told, full of filth and venom, which is a description I rather like. I should say, by the way, this is not mere speculation on Digory's part. He could hear the dragon, and running a little farther forward, he could see the dragon. His jaws were huge, his throat was wide, his massive feet had claws like lions, his wings bitterly beat, his tail was great as a cedar tree, even as great as the tail of the behemoth which the Lord showed to the righteous Job. Smoke trailed up from his nostrils like smoke from a chimney. His breath was the heat of a furnace. Now the dragon was fighting someone, a knight and his squire, if you could call it fighting. The battle was nearly over. The squire's mortally wounded. The earl, for so he was so badly torn and burned that it was very clear he was not going to last much longer. The earl had fought stoutly as any man might be expected to do under the circumstances, but his sword was notched, and the dragon's hide was hard as iron. "Help me," the earl cries out, "of your charity." So Digory runs forward, and before he knows what he's doing, he strikes the dragon on the head with a cudgel. Now, I mentioned that Digory was strong, but until this moment, nobody, least of all Digory, knew exactly how strong he was. He took a staff and he swung it like a huge bat. This is actually the word that they use in Middle English, by the way, bat. You should imagine like a Louisville slugger. Swings it like a huge bat, hits the dragon in the head, and the dragon's skull shatters under the force of the blow. Well, needless to say, the Earl is as grateful as a man could be. Right? He takes Digory back to his castle. He offers him all the usual things that you would offer to a man who's just saved your realm from the depredations of a terrible dragon. Right? Riches, lands, pick of his daughters, half his earldom, so on and so forth. I should mention, by the way, that there's one odd episode that happens at the Earl's castle, or at least it's odd to them. It won't be odd to you because you know the story. Once Digory has been wined and dined, he puts on a change of clothes, and we must say he's rather the better for it. He's now looking quite splendid and princely, more handsome and more fair than the women of the Earl's court have ever seen. And he asks that the Earl would bring before him all the noble ladies of the court, and the Earl, with a wink and a nudge, acquiesces. Only for Digory to pull out a strange, curious pair of golden gloves and to try them on each of the women. Now, one of the great tragedies of life is not knowing which fairy tale that you're in. And so all of these women think that they're in Cinderella. But they're thinking, he's going to put the gloves on me, and they're going to fit, and then we're going to be wed. And so they're doing everything that they can to make them fit and trying to, shove their hands inside and all these different things. The gloves do not fit any of them. And of course, as we all know, if the glove don't fit, you must acquit.
Must acquit.
You must acquit. It's one of my earliest memories is watching the Simpson trial.
I hope that story someday becomes a true fairy tale.
Yeah, my gosh. Yeah. So, they're all sort of trying to shove the gloves on. None of it's working. And alas, with a heavy sigh, Digory dismisses them, tells the Earl about the gloves, tells the Earl about his mother's letter, and the whole sad story of his whole short life. The Earl says, "You're evidently the son of some great king or prince. So your mother must also be some great lady. Not far hence from here lies the realm of Brittany, where the Duke holds each year a tournament of arms. He will only, he is the mightiest men. He says the Duke is a mighty man. He's the mightiest of the sons of men, or at least the mightiest that I have ever seen before today. And his fair daughter, the princess, has not aged, they say, for 18 summers. He will only give her hand in marriage to the one who could defeat him in a contest of arms. And so kings and lords and dukes and earls and knights from far off Persia and Saracens from the southern lands all come each year to test their strength against him. None have yet succeeded, but it has become such a splendid gathering that all the great lords and ladies from all the nearby kingdoms are gathered there every year to watch the spectacle. Mark my words, if your mother is to be found anywhere, it'll be at the castle of the Duke of Brittany." So for his valor, the Earl makes Digory a knight. He gives him the gift of horse and arms. and a shield which bears no device. For though as yet Digory does not know his name, he does not know his purpose, he does not know his story. So Digory rides off to the Duke's castle, where the tournament was being held. Now, several well-meaning people saw the beautiful young knight. They tried to warn him off. They were pretty sure that he was going to be wounded or killed. And though Digory, we should actually call him Sir Digory now, has come to find his mother, all of the people trying to discourage him have the effect of making him very determined actually to fight in the tournament. Now here, by the way, the old bards would want me to remind you that Sir Digory is a pious man. Remember that he grew up in a chapel with a hermit. And so before he goes to fight, he goes to the church and he hears a mass, and of the coins that are left to him from his mother's gift long ago, he gives 3 florins, one for the Father, one for the Son, one for the Holy Spirit. And he says, after all, I have no man, no friend, like no second, no squire, nobody to back me up, to whom I may entrust myself. And so I must put all my faith in these 3 in the Holy Trinity. So the bards always make a point of mentioning this in the story, and so I must as well. Now, in olden days, when people watched a great many tournaments, they could really stomach long passages of poetry about tournaments, right? I mentioned this earlier, right? There would be many details told here of that day. Who fought whom, how splendidly they were armed, the devices on their shields, their banners, the ladies' favors that were won and lost as fortunes rose and fell. Digory was the talk of the tournament. This mysterious knight with no coat of arms, who fought and felled each night on the tilting field. And every time he did it, he said, whether death or life should me betide, against the Duke this day I'll ride. So at the end of the day, only Sir Digory is left standing. And just as he had done some 20 years in a row now, the Duke rode out to face him. They rode hard at each other, leveled their lances, met with a terrific crash. Both lances splintered, but oh! To the Duke's great surprise, to everyone's great surprise, Digory kept his place in the saddle. He says, "Bring me a shaft that will not break," says the Duke to his squire. "He's as strong as Samson, but I'll unhorse him yet." So they both get new lances, they ride at each other again, and this time Digory did something very clever with his lance. Something I don't quite understand, because I've never jousted in a tournament. It's a little twist right as they meet in the middle of the tilting field. No one had taught this to Digory, but it must be remembered that he had fairy blood flowing in his veins. And the strap of the Duke's shield broke. The Duke goes flying, let us say, head over heels to the ground. There's a terrific crash. There's a deafening silence, and then the crowd goes wild. After 20 years, someone had unhorsed the Duke. And truth be told, once his pride had recovered, not to say his rear end, even the Duke was quite happy about all of this. You can imagine that 20 years of tournaments to marry off his suspiciously ageless daughter was starting to get a little tedious. A great deal of fuss was made over Digory, to the victor the spoils, of course, so Digory is taken to meet his new bride, and she is, in fact, the most beautiful woman that Digory has ever seen. For her part, she thought Digory was the most beautiful knight that she'd ever seen, except perhaps one whom she had met 18 years before. And now, gentle listener, you have by now figured out where this is going. There was a church wedding, followed by a great feast. And since the princess had waited so long for her wedding day, the feast went on for many nights and many days, and everyone was there. Kings and dukes and earls and lords, princes and princesses, knights from far off Asia, and lords of the Saracens. Everyone is there to celebrate their bliss. And when the feast is over, with a wink and a nudge from the Duke, Digory and his bride go upstairs to the bridal chamber.
Oh, man.
And this is where, thinking about what I said about eucatastrophe, this is where something really disastrous could happen. Could have happened, almost happened, as it did in Thebes long ago. So we can imagine Digory's shyness. He's never spent any time around girls before, not to speak of. As he removes his armor, he begins to unbutton his doublet, and then one of the gloves drops to the ground. And the princess gives a little gasp. And Sir Digory remembers that there's something important he's forgotten to do, and so reluctantly produces the other glove And almost as though she knows why, she holds out her hands. And the gloves fit, well, like a glove. That's the saying, right? Digory turns several shades of purple. The princess weeps, and they stay up all night, talking and weeping. And at last, Digory asks about his father. And the princess tells him about that day in the wood, when a sleep fell upon her companions, and the shadows grew dark around her. She tells him about the handsome fairy knight who took her maidenhood and left her with a son. She takes out the blade that was broken, and a strange fire comes into Digory's eyes. "By heaven's king, I do not know his name," the princess said, "but he bade me to give you this sword. By it, he will know you." So the next day, after some hasty discussions with a very confused duke, Sir Digory rode out again. At his side now, the blade that was broken, and he determined to find his father. Now, Digory has a lot of adventures in the search for his father. On some other day, if there was more time, I would tell some of them to you. There are adventures of the usual sort, courtly adventures involving strange castles, enigmatic and well-dressed dwarves. There are always dwarves in these stories, for a reason I will not here reveal. Damsels in distress. One of these damsels was a very beautiful woman, actually the most beautiful woman Digory has ever met. Except this time, he's fairly certain it has no chance of being his mother. And therefore, he falls madly, helplessly in love with her. Their courtship is not an easy one. Digory has some lessons that he has to learn. He has to learn to stand and do his duty, which is not something he's ever really been required to do before. She, of course, has an unwanted suitor, as is often the case. In this case, it is a bandit lord that Digory has to deal with. But in the end, he manages all of these things, and when it's all said and done, she invites Digory to stay with her. She says, "Stay with me. I'll be your lady. You'll be my lord. We'll rule these lands together." And Digory wants to stay. He really, really does. But he can't do it yet, because his shield is still blank. He only knows half his name, half his story. He's got no father. So he makes a compromise. He says, "I'm going to go out and look for my father again, but I'll come back in a year and a day. And by that point, if I haven't found my father, fine, I'll settle down with you and we'll be wed." So Sir Digory heads back out on errantry, and for almost a full year he rides hither and yon, challenging every knight he meets, rescuing many damsels, righting many wrongs, etc., etc., etc. Still no sign of the mysterious knight who has sired him. At this point, time is running out for Digory. To keep his promise to return in a year and a day, knights should always keep their promises. And so in order to make it back in time, he takes a shortcut through the deepest part of the forest. Now, you might be thinking, why didn't you start looking there to begin with? But there are some things that you can only find once you've stopped looking for them. You never know what is going to happen when you go wandering deep, deep into the forest. In those days, almost all of Europe was one vast forest, and there were deep, dark places, places where paths and trails cross and cross again before they vanish altogether, places that don't care anything about who you are or who your father is, places that don't care about crowns or kingdoms. Old places, dark places. And as it began to grow dark, Digory was not afraid. He was, however, quite lost. And as the shadows grew, he heard something in the thicket. A figure rises into the clearing, and it is a knight. It is the most glorious knight Sir Digory has ever seen. He's sitting aside a steed, strong and light. His arms are glorious. He bears upon his shield a field of azure with 3 boar's heads painted thereon in the finest gold. But there's something about his eyes as dark as the forest and as gray as the sea. The eyes of someone who had looked long into the future or to the past and forgotten to look back. And that is how Digory knew that he had met one of the fairies. "Sir, God be with thee," says Digory, "because you must always be polite to fairies." "Villain," says the fairy knight, "what dost thou here? Have you entered my forest to hunt my deer?" "Deer? No." Digory actually laughed, which is not something you should do with fairies. He says, "I don't hunt deer. I'm a knight. I'm only interested in battle if there's any to be had here. If you came looking for a fight, you've found it," says the fairy knight. And they set their lances, and both men charged the other, and might met might. Lances shattered, saddle straps burst. Both men go crashing to the ground. Both men stand in anger and draw their swords. And then the fairy knight gives a cry of horror and wonder and recognition. And he throws down his weapon and he points at the sword in Digory's hand. And trembling, he removes his helmet. Digory sees his own face as though in a mirror. And he says, "That is the blade that was broken. I am your father, and you are my son." They stayed up all night, talking and weeping. Now, since the bards do not linger on the ending, neither will I. The next day, they ride together, and with the fairy prince leading the way, it takes no time at all. They ride to the castle of the young lady, whom they collect, and the next day, after that, to the palace of the Duke of Brittany. Very quickly, an annulment was arranged for the previous marriage, and there was, so it is said, a double wedding. The feast goes on for many nights and many days, and everyone is, of course, there. The kings and dukes and earls and lords, princes and princesses, knights from far of Persia, lords of the Saracens. Everyone is there to celebrate their bliss, and nobody was more relieved than the Duke. And they all lived happily ever after. The end.
You know, I have to say, for a while I was like, okay, so how is this Oedipus? How is this the Oedipus story?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I mean, I thought it was interesting actually that there was not an attempt by the author. Like, he didn't say this is Oedipus. He didn't call him that.
No.
But there's
a little more in Sir Orfeo. There's a little more of a bald retelling.
Yeah.
But in Sir Digory, Sir Digory, I'm just going to call it Sir Digory.
It's okay.
In Sir Digory, all of the elements are actually there, though. If you pay attention to the journeys that he takes, he's raised by somebody else. Journeys that he takes, even the fighting of the dragon, which has the feet of a lion, right? It's very clearly connected to the Sphinx.
Sphinx,
right? Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing that occurred, I mean, this is a small detail, but one of the things that occurred to me along the way was, when Digory is then courting this other woman, and you might even also think like, well, okay, yes, he didn't, thank God, do anything with his mother, but he was married to her, but he wasn't really married to her, and this is why there's an easy annulment, because they never consummated the marriage. You know, they might have gone through the church service, but it was not consummated, and so it was not
right. Exactly,
a true marriage.
Yeah.
Right. One of the things that also occurs to me. So, as I said, everybody, I have never heard this story before. I was aware of it, but I haven't read it. So this was my first hearing. But another thing that also occurred to me is that while he does not succeed in killing his father, his actual father, there is an analog that exists in this where he defeats his grandfather in battle.
That's right?
So there's a certain level on which it is playing out, but not quite. That the story is being healed on multiple levels and being allowed to proceed, and be fixed in different kinds of ways. I mean, that was really, really interesting to me. Actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually quite a very artful retelling. Let's put it that way. Like they were not just trying to retell Oedipus, and I would not want you to come away from this episode thinking, oh, that's just a retelling of the Oedipus myth, because then it puts it in this sort of, well, that's just a, category. And that's not the point that I'm trying to make. The point that I'm trying to make is the way that people in the Middle Ages were interested in taking these things that they would have considered part of the matter of Rome, that is, things having to do with the classical world, and transformed them through this medium of the fairy story. One of my other favorite Breton lays, which I will definitely share with you all at some point in the near future or the distant future, some version of the future, or the past, who knows, is Sir Launfal, which is it's a story set in Arthur's court, but it's a story set in Arthur's court before a lot of the Arthurian stuff as we think of it has really developed. And it's just a really kind of a cool, fun, it's kind of more of a comedy. Sir Digory is, it's a very courtly poem. It's got a very kind of courtly dialect to it, but it's a very serious poem. There's not a lot of humor. There's a little bit of humor, but for the most part, it's a very kind of a serious poem. And these stories were, self-consciously written for enjoyment. People are writing these things to tell them and to copy them and repeat them. And and I don't know. There's something about this story that I would I would hesitate to dissect. But there's something about the story that has had me just coming back to it over and over again in the last year or so. And that's part of why, this is the thing, like when you find a story that catches you like this, you just have to retell it a little bit.
Well, so not to dissect, but maybe to appreciate a little.
Sure.
in some particular way.
I don't want to offend the story, but because I'm living with it, but you can say whatever you want.
It's in your jaw.
Yeah.
Yes. Or maybe it's in your beard. One of the things that occurs to me is the effect is, in comparison especially to Oedipus, where the effect on the audience, you've got this intense dramatic irony and horror. It's building horror, but in a way that's not, it's not like modern cinematic horror where you show them something terrible, right? It's a completely different kind of horror where what's going to happen. The story, it's awful. And the question is, how is it going to play out? And you're experiencing it in some level through Oedipus's eyes. This is speaking about the Sophocles play, Oedipus the King, the way that the story plays out. It's about discovering the truth, right? But the effect in this story is there's some of the tension. Is he going to kill his father? Is he going to truly marry his mother? Oh wait, he did marry his mother, but not really. And yet it's much more gentle, and you can tell just from the tone that it's not going to turn out badly in the end. The tone itself begins that way. You just know that that's the character of this story. And that's not just because you gave this prologue where you talked about happy endings and stuff. It is the kind of story that has a happy ending. And if it didn't have a happy ending, you would feel violated. Just as if Oedipus, the king, did not end the way that it did, you would feel violated. Like, what? I'm being ripped off?
Yeah. That's right.
It's right. Not. It needs to go this way. The story has like a logic to it.
If you put this like sudden, and then like Oedipus and Jocasta decided, oh, it's okay, let's just be friends now. Like, obviously, that would not be an okay ending. Like, it would not be an okay. And so, yeah, you're right. This is not just a soporific kind of, oh, now it has a happy ending. There's some real, there's some dark things in this story.
Yes,
yes. And don't go in the woods by yourself, guys.
There's some Little Red Riding Hood stuff going on.
Of course.
Right, like with the princess, she goes off. And when I said the prettiest flower is farthest from the path, that's actually a quote from Into the Woods.
Mm-hmm. No, I got that one.
Oh, just
no, I got that one. Sorry,
I don't know what pop culture you know.
I don't either. So it's okay. Okay. You just never know with me. It's a roll of the dice. Yeah.
But think about it, right? So there is a Little Red Riding Hood element in that.
Yeah.
She goes off into the woods. She's picking flowers. She's going and getting lost. And then there's a certain way in which she's devoured by a wolf. Now, in this case, not literally, but she is violated.
Of course.
She is. And now you mentioned the double wedding in the end, so that means obviously she does eventually marry, Digory's father, but nonetheless, there is a sin.
I mean, the what it says in the poem is that she weeps and protests,
right?
But there's nothing she can do. I mean, it's
right.
It's not
a violation.
Yeah, it's a the poet is delicate. Is about as delicate as he can be about something like that, and I try to follow that in my telling as well, and just sort of like mentioning what's happened, but the point is not to linger on that, as so much as to see like how could even this like very tragic thing. So like the thing is that the story starts. This could be a pagan tragedy, like in the beginning, right? You've got. This could have been Zeus or Apollo or something, right? This could have just like the beginning of the story could have just been a chapter from Ovid, right? But then there are all these little things, and notice that the magic here is the kind of magic that Tolkien says is what defines the real magic of fairies, the magic of real fairy stories, which is that nobody's casting fireball. There's nothing occult happening here. Actually, there are two. Arguably just one magical thing in here, which is the pair of gloves.
The glove.
Maybe sort of the broken sword as well.
Ish.
Which, ish, I mean, it's as magical as, Anduril is magical, but...
Yeah, I mean, it is in a sense it's a magical sword, but it's not the magic of the sword...
Right.
That is which makes the...
Well, to some degree, all swords are magical, but what I mean is the connection between the... I mean, just think about what is the symbolism of you don't know who your father is and you have a broken sword. Like, I don't have to spell that one out too much, I think. But anyway, there's no like overt magic in this, right? But it's a story of humans who come into contact with fairies, and then the sort of the things that happen, and in the end, there's a happy ending. Actually, not just for the humans, but also for the fairies involved. It's really extraordinary.
One of the other things that occurs to me, and I don't know how to tease this out, but I'm just going to throw these elements on the table because I think they have something to do with each other, is so Digory's father says that the sword, it gets broken because he buries the tip of it in the head of
a giant.
Giant.
Yep.
Well, I mean, what is Digory? Isn't he is, I don't know, I'm not saying we don't need to go full Nephilim here, but he is himself, like he's half fairy and half human.
He's half something. That's
and which, I mean, this does exist in the Celtic traditions. There's the Fomorians, there's these kinds of these monstrous things. And so like there is a certain level on which he is a monster, right? And so in some way, right, part of what's happening is that this could be it's getting repeated that his fairy father is about to kill another giant, so to speak, which in this case is his own son. And yet that's not what happens. It's stopped and it's healed, and he's married to a human. And the dad is married to a human as well.
And of course, the idea is that the fairy knight, has a Christian wedding. Like he becomes like he's at some point he sort of stops being a fairy in the sense that he becomes fully integrated into Christian human society.
There's a repentance that ultimately is going on here. There's a crossing over from the other world into the primary world. For him,
his son is the component that's necessary for that transition to happen, which is really interesting because it's a kind of a fun example of something Tolkien talks about in non-fairy stories, where he says, fairies must tell human stories. This idea that they would tell stories about fairies getting caught up in the things that are going on in the human world. And that is kind of what happened to this one guy. Like, you can imagine there's some other version of the story out there being told by, three guys sitting under a toadstool doing a podcast in northern France. And I'm really sorry. I've just offended all the fairies. I'm really sorry, guys.
But they're Norman fairies.
Yeah. It's okay. Everybody knows actually that fairies. Boy, I'm gonna get in some kind of trouble for saying this. Everybody knows like fairies can't. I can't do anything to clergy, so it's. Yeah,
it's true.
Yeah,
it's true.
Yep.
We have great wards.
Yes.
Another thing that also occurs to me, another maybe echo that I hear in this story is Percival. There's a certain, the knight who does not know who he is, who is really powerful and doesn't know that, and is looking for
really
his true identity. He's there's a connection with a hermit, all this kind of stuff.
This is almost certainly.
But see our earlier episode, everybody, about Percival.
Yeah, how do I put this? So the stories are probably from the same place originally, in the sense that, if this is we don't actually, I don't actually know that. So I can't really say it with any kind of confidence. But there is a kind of a hypothesis around the Arthurian stuff that says that it is a. I have the book, but I think it's up in the loft. There's a hypothesis around the Arthurian stuff that says that it is maybe actually something that was brought to this place in northern Britain, and then also northern Britain and northern France by basically mercenaries from the Caucasians, from the Caucasus Mountains, basically what is now modern day Dagestan. So if you think of somebody like Khabib Nurmagomedov, or one of the other big MMA fighters from out in Dagestan, there is actually a hypothesis that is where the Arthurian stories are sort of ancient tribal stories from that region, and then when the Romans transplant those people as mercenaries, which they often did, you bring in people who aren't related to any of the locals, so they'll just be loyal to you. And then the Western Empire starts to collapse, and so these people set up kingdoms, and so they have horses while nobody else does, and they have this tradition of like fighting in armor. There is some evidence to suggest that the whole system of heraldry, coats of arms, and so on, goes back to like the sort of totemic tribal animals for some of these different tribes. And so anyway, Percival is actually connected maybe to one of these groups. I'm not going to go into it right now. It's an interesting theory. It doesn't explain everything, but I think it is, when we talk about Arthur, it is probably one of the bones in the soup. So anyway, I don't want to get into this too much because we don't know enough about the Sir Digory story. Like, was this a story that somebody was telling before, or was the first guy who wrote it down, was it that the first one? Actually, a lot of these were written by women, by the way. The most famous collection of lays was written by Marie de France, so it could have been a lady that wrote this. We don't know. There's no name. There's no name on the poem. But in any case, I don't know. I just really love the story. I think it's really compelling. I think that certainly something that a lot of men of my generation are searching for is a name and an identity, and kind of to know what your place in the world is. And I just think it's a great story. So thanks for indulging me, Father. I know this is a little different from what we'd normally do.
No, but, I mean, this is the Great Tales. That means we're not going to just talk about stories.
That's right. We're
going to tell a few stories along the way, and I'm pretty sure the people listening right now are very happy with all that.
Yeah, people probably into it.
There was a lot of love for when we had Dr. Shaw.
Yeah. Well, I certainly, thing is, I can't be Dr. Shaw, but I'm grateful to him for his help in, kind of refining some of the storytelling that I'm working on right now. And I hope that eventually, that's the thing as a storyteller, is that, eventually you've got to kind of find your voice, just like Digory has to find his name. Actually, something that's really interesting is that his name doesn't change in the story. It's not like he has a secret name that he then discovers later. He's always Digory.
Yeah,
but that just comes to mean something. It's really,
I mean, the same is true for Oedipus. Oedipus has just the one name.
Yeah. But I don't know if there's. Well, that's right. That's right. Yeah, swollen foot. Yeah. Which is funny because Oedipus is sort of the one who can't wander, because he's lame,
and he has to be sent out there. All right. Well, why don't we check in? We've already made some references to the chat. But why don't we check in? Actually, very nice to see your wife has tuned in, and she said quite at the beginning, we loved the intro, and no doubt the "we" there means the whole Roland clan. So. Watching from across the yard, I suppose.
Yep, on the they're almost a full acre away from me, actually.
Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah. Very nice. So thanks for tuning in, Sophia, for we're honored that you guys watch.
Matushka.
Yes. Yeah, right. Or as we would say in my tradition, Shamasi, which means the wife of a deacon.
Yeah.
So, yeah. What else here? Yes, your fellow parishioner Nathaniel Masters says he's a little late and he walks into Middle English, he says.
Listen, this has happened to me often. And surely it's not the first time that's happened. He comes over to my house a lot. I'm sure it's not the first time that's happened.
You know, I have to say, okay, just as a little comment, because we've made reference to Middle English, but we haven't really dived too deep into it as yet on this show. Mm-hmm. So I just want to pay a very slight tribute here. I mean, for me, my undergraduate years are very, very far in the rearview mirror now. But one of my favorite professors was Professor Linda Hawley. And Professor Hawley, I think now, I'm not sure if she's still living, but I think she has a horse farm somewhere in Virginia now or something like that, which is exactly how you should end your days.
That's a good life. That is how I would go out right there.
But she was a classic Southern woman, and she taught English at North Carolina State University, which is where I did my undergrad. And she was very insistent upon pronouncing Middle English in a very learned way. Mm-hmm. And so it was from her that I gained the love for the sound of Middle English, Wan that April, that shore socht, as the beginning of Canterbury Tales. And why it is, thank God, because of her teaching, that most Middle English texts I can just simply sit down with them and read them. Which, by the way, I should say to people, I know you look at Chaucer or whoever else, it can be a little daunting, but just look at the little glosses off in the corner, and it's not that tough.
If you're somebody who likes to read books, you should be able to get up to speed on Chaucer, whose Middle English is quite late. It's closer to Shakespeare than it is to Beowulf. You should be able to get up to speed on Chaucer in like 2 weeks. Just sit and read for an hour a day.
So I just want to, as I said, to pay some honor to one of my teachers from when I was doing my undergraduate degree at North Carolina State in central North Carolina, in Raleigh, North Carolina. So what else we got here? Actually, I think that Nathaniel also said something about, where is it? That you hate happy endings. Oh yes, here it goes. Deacon Seraphim hates happy endings when he's the GM.
The way that I would put it is, if I'm running a role-playing game and you're the player and I'm the GM, the happy ending is up to you. I'm just here to run the world. It's up to you to go make a happy ending. So,
so if you get eaten by a dragon, that is happy for the dragon.
Yeah, I mean, no one is saying it's a happy ending, but I'm just like, well, listen, it's what usually if players, I have to go, this is not an RPG podcast, but I'll just say is that usually in the games that I'm running, if something really awfully tragically bad happens to players, or at least to their characters, it is because of poor impulse control on the part of at least one set player.
So Nathaniel, it's your own fault.
Well,
it's your own fault.
Some other people who are also listening.
Very tactfully. That's what he's saying.
You know who we're talking about, Ben. Okay, all right. So
Leroy.
Yep. Okay, all right. Well, anyway, we'll go on from this. I'm going to get back to doing some RPG related things on the internet, hopefully later this year. I'm quite excited about that. So
all right. Justin Hover actually has a really, I think, provocative thing to say. He says, Fae, that is fairies, are the cracks on the edge of civilization. Not quite here be dragons, more just the weird shadows in the corner of your eye. What do you think of that? I like that.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, so the thing is that a fairy is something that you cannot quite pin down. As soon as you pin it down, it becomes something else. Dragons are this way a little bit too. where if you focus on them too much and you try to like taxonomize them, then they always end up in some other category. The whole point of a fairy is this thing that's on the edge of your perception. It's on the edge of your experience. It's the broken down remnants left over from something that came before. I mean, you mentioned, like Fomorians and things like that, but there are peoples, if you look at the Book of the Invasions of Ireland or something like that, which I've done a Universal History episode on, some of those groups were obviously like sort of Nephilim in the sense that they were giants, they were half god and half man, et cetera, and then other groups came in and completely eradicated them, and then other groups came in and eradicated them, and then other groups came in, because if you're in Brittany or if you're in the British Isles, you are on the edge of the world, and it's where everything gets pushed to at the end, right? When it sort of runs out, this is where the remainder goes.
That's where all the fairy refugees are.
Yeah, I mean, that's one way to think about it, is that fairies are sort of refugees from broken spiritual hierarchies. And this doesn't mean that they're not this doesn't mean that they're neutral spirits. The point is not the neutrality, the point is the ambiguity, and those are not the same thing.
Yeah.
And so the big thing that I mean, we'll talk about this, but in all of the eyewitness accounts, and there are quite many, where fairies encounter Christians, the fairies almost always want to know one thing, which is, could we be saved? Is there any hope for us? And the answer, and sometimes they just show up and they ask, like, somebody milking their cow, and they're, that person has a really bad day, or but very often they show up and they sort of ask they show up to some priest as he's like making his rounds. They're like, Father, can we be saved? Is there going to be any hope for us? And sometimes the priest says, recite the Our Father. And so the fairy says, Our, and then he tries to say Father, and he can't do it, and he throws himself in the nearest body of water. That happens sometimes. What also sometimes happens is that the priest says, I don't know, let me ask the bishop. And the bishop says, that can't be known until the day of judgment. So there is a kind of ambiguity in these stories. And I think it's really important that we just understand the ways that fairies are operating in these kind of traditional stories, and we do not try too hard to sort of taxonomize, because the point is that whatever this thing is, that can't be known until the day of judgment. Like, it's something that has lost connection with its telos, so it doesn't know what it's moving toward. It doesn't know where it's going to end up.
Yeah, I know, like, here in the 21st century, like a 21st century person encountering stories like this, or encountering spiritual beings or whatever, the tendency is to want to try to create, the museum of supernatural history.
Yeah.
But
or they just like try to psychologize everything. I mean, I'm the sort of person, I think everyone knows this about me, nobody will scandalize. I'm the sort of person that takes things like eyewitness accounts of fairies like very seriously.
Yeah.
Like I look at the stuff as sort of like, this is serious data, and the point of it is not to make a museum of supernatural history, or also like overlay psychologize somebody and say all these people were drunk, or all these people were crazy, or all these people. Yeah. It's like, no, there's like well attested experiences over wide numbers of people that have, boy, I'm sounding like a crazy person on the internet now, okay, but there are well attested experiences over large numbers of people over considerable amounts of time, where they describe having the same kind of experiences, and you have to sort of look at this and say, are these people all crazy, or is there something going on here? And if there's something going on here, then what might it be? Yeah. And so anyway, so this is the thing, but you can't. A fairy is something by its nature. I mean, I like the idea that they're the cracks on the edge of civilization. It's something by its nature which you cannot pin down or taxonomize. If you try to do that, and you're like, how is a sprite related to a pixie, or and which one's an elf, or anything like that? Like, the only way to safely do anything like that would be to spend 50 years toiling away in obscurity on a vast legendarium full of complex languages and histories.
Who would do that?
Who would do such a thing? Yeah. But anyway, okay. So I'll stop like ranting. Like
okay, I wanted to highlight one last, because we're just about at 2 hours here. I wanted to highlight one last comment, though. There's some other lovely comments in the chat, by the way, everybody. So Jensen Thomas says, I'm reading, and I don't know how to pronounce this, the Shahnameh, the Persian Book of Kings.
Yep.
I recognize that Shah, that's the king word there, written 977 to 1010. So we're talking 10th, 11th century. This is 1,000 years old. It mentions Peris, or fairies in English, although Persian...
The party, or the peri, the party, yeah.
Yeah. Although Persian, it's full of heartbreak / good catastrophes like other fairy tales. I actually, I think it was our own YouTube manager, Simon, who's working with us right now and doing this, who actually asked me at one point, are you guys going to cover this text?
Oh, really?
So yeah, I think, yeah. Oh, I probably should have mentioned that. We've had some.
I mean, so I should here mention that my when I was doing my degree in Germanic philology, I had to spend a semester working on a non-Germanic language, and so I thought very briefly about doing some kind of Celtic, and then I thought better of it, and so I spent that semester doing Avestan, or Old Persian, and Middle Persian. These are some of my favorite languages. I have 2 very extensive conlangs with 7,000 or 8,000 word vocabularies that are inspired by Old and Middle Persian. I love Persian things really a whole lot.
Fun. So
I'm here for it.
My wife actually took some Persian, so she understands some Persian. She took some Persian in as an undergrad, actually. Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to me. I mean, it's an Indo-European language, so it's related to all of these languages that we spend our time swimming around in, but it's, the Middle East.
Yep.
So that's just fun.
Yep. I love Persian history. I love the sort of the rags to riches tale of, these barbarians from one tiny corner of the Indo-European, the Eurasian steppe who, anyway. Love Persian stuff. So I'm here for it, guys. I'm here for it.
Indeed. All right. Well, that wraps up this conversation. And I just want to say I hope y'all will stick with us for this hot Theban summer. We've just begun our discussion of Oedipus. But I think that beginning it like with this the lay of Sir Digory, I think is great, because what it does is it reminds us that we're reading all these things as Christians.
Yeah.
As Christians. And so we have the happy ending. We have, as Tolkien called it, the great eucatastrophe, the gospel itself. And that is always the context for everything that we read. So,
amen.
So we've begun, and I think it's going to be a fun set of deep dives into this one kind of, I don't know, the Oedipal legendarium. Can we call it that? The Oedipal legendarium?
Definitely
no. No,
we'll think. I mean, it's sort of like the Oedipus, the Theban cycle, something like that.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, I don't know. Let's workshop it. Okay, Oedipal Legendarium sounds like the worst band. So I just want to workshop this a little bit. But
you guys in the chat, come up with something for us. Email us. You can ancientfaith.com. We want to hear your.
And I want to see your suggested T-shirt art for hot Theban summer T-shirts. All that stuff. Yeah.
Okay. Exactly.
Now, thanked be ye, fair and wise, who joined us neath these storied skies to hear of Oedipus the grim and Digory's lay with knighthood's vim. Yet tread with care in woodland deep, for fairy wakes while mortals sleep. And mark ye well, these summer eves our tales are told when daylight leaves.
If ye watch upon the crystal screen where YouTube's bell doth sit unseen, then ring it well, and let it chime, so thou art warned in fitting time. For twice a month, with tongue and flame, we call old tales to life again. And next we return with ancient texts to tell the tale of Oedipus Rex.
Farewell, dear friends, and may ye see the shape of virtue bold and free in every book, in every line, where hidden lights in darkness shine.
This tale was brought with humble cheer by ancient faith for eye and ear, to those who watch and those who pray, we thank thee for thy gift this day.